The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the runway, heat shimmers dancing off the concrete like ghosts in broad daylight. Captain Rebecca "Becca" Haze adjusted her flight suit and watched as 4 F-35s sat in perfect formation on the main pad, their matte gray surfaces drinking in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in the distance, the rumble of practice jets cut through the desert silence, but here on the ground, everything felt suspended in waiting. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and dry erase markers. Becca stood near the back wall, her regulation helmet tucked under one arm, watching as Major Patrick Davidson paced in front of the tactical display. His mirrored aviators caught the fluorescent lights as he gestured toward the mission board with military precision. "Standard combat simulation," Davidson announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. "Blue. Team defense, red team aggression. We've got visiting Rafale pilots from Nellis running the opposition today." He paused, scanning the room with practiced indifference. "Thompson, you're lead. Martinez takes 2. Jackson, you're 3. The 3 named pilots straightened slightly, anticipation crackling through their postures. Thompson, a cocky captain with perfectly styled hair, grinned at his wingman. "Time to show these foreign boys how Americans fly," he muttered, loud, enough to earn chuckles from the others. Davidson's finger moved to the far corner of the tactical display, barely grazing a small triangle drawn in faded blue marker. "Haze," he said without looking at her, "you're running backup patrol. Triangle formation, passive radar only. Stay low, stay quiet, and try not to get in anyone's way." The casual dismissal hung in the air like smoke. Becca felt the familiar weight of being relegated to the shadows, but her expression remained neutral. She'd learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. "Sir," she said simply, her voice steady. "Understood." Thompson turned in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. "Don't worry, Haze, we'll handle the real flying. You just, I don't know, practice your sightseeing or whatever." The room erupted in quiet laughter, the kind that excludes rather than includes. As the briefing concluded, Becca watched the others file out, their voices animated with pre-flight bravado. She lingered behind, studying the tactical display more carefully. The triangle they'd assigned her wasn't random. It covered specific radar shadow zones she'd identified during months of studying the range's topography. What they saw as busy work, she recognized as strategic positioning. Walking to the flight line, the desert heat hit her like opening an oven door. Her F-35, tail number 068, sat slightly apart from the others. No custom nose art, no colorful squadron patches, no personality markers that screamed for attention. It was exactly how she preferred it: functional, invisible, effective. Staff. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez approached from the maintenance bay, toolkit in hand. Maria was one of the few people on base who treated Becca like a pilot rather than a placeholder. "How's she looking today, Captain?" Maria asked, running her hand along the aircraft's starboard wing. "Like she wants to disappear," Becca replied with the ghost of a smile. Maria chuckled. "Good thing you two understand each other." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Word from the tower is Red Team's bringing their A-game today. These Rafale guys aren't here for a friendly handshake." Becca nodded, filing away the intelligence. Everything mattered in the air, especially the things people didn't think to mention in official briefings. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, she overheard Thompson's voice carrying across the tarmac. "Backup dancer finally gets to join the show. Think she'll remember which way is up?" His wingman, Captain Mike Rodriguez, laughed. "Long as she stays out of our target lanes, she can fly figure-eights for all I care." The words stung, but Becca had developed thick skin over years of similar treatment. She'd graduated 3rd in her flight school class, logged more simulator hours than anyone in her cohort, and maintained a flawless safety record. None of it seemed to matter when assignment time came around. She was consistently labeled as steady but unremarkable, technically proficient but lacks aggressive instincts, and her personal favorite, flies like she's afraid to be noticed. What they didn't understand was that invisibility was her greatest weapon. Climbing into her cockpit, Becca felt the familiar embrace of the F-35's advanced systems. The heads-up display flickered to life, bathing her in soft green light. She'd spent countless off-duty hours in the simulators, not practicing aggressive maneuvers like the others, but perfecting the art of electronic invisibility. She knew exactly how to minimize her aircraft's radar cross-section, how to mask her heat signature, and how to move through enemy detection networks like smoke through a screen door. The control tower's voice crackled through her headset. "Blue, flight, you're cleared for takeoff. Weather is clear, winds light and variable. Red team is inbound from the northwest. Expected contact in 15 minutes. One by one, Thompson's formation thundered down the runway, afterburners painting the sky with flame and noise. They climbed aggressively, already chattering on the radio about intercept vectors and missile locks. Becca waited her turn, then eased her throttles forward with deliberate control. Her takeoff was smooth, almost gentle, angling southwest toward the first point of her assigned triangle. As the desert floor fell away beneath her, she switched her radar to passive mode and activated every stealth protocol in her arsenal. The air traffic control center, the controller watching the tactical display, frowned slightly. "Anyone else notice backup just disappeared?" His supervisor glanced over. "Backup? Haze, she was on scope 30 seconds ago. Now nothing. Equipment glitch. Log it and move on." What they didn't realize was that Becca hadn't disappeared by accident. She'd spent months studying this exact airspace, mapping every radar blind, spot every thermal inversion layer, every electronic shadow where an F-35 could vanish completely. While her teammates flew loud and proud, broadcasting their positions like beacons, she had become a ghost. The triangle pattern they dismissed as busy work was actually a carefully calculated trap. Each leg positioned her perfectly to intercept. Any aircraft that tried to penetrate the defensive perimeter, she wasn't running backup. She was setting an ambush. Through her headset, she heard Thompson's voice. "Blue lead to all aircraft. I've got multiple contacts bearing northwest. High. And fast." "These guys mean business." Becca said nothing. She simply adjusted her course by 2 degrees, slipped into the shadow of a radar-scattering ridgeline, and prepared to show them all what quiet professionalism could accomplish. The real fight was about to begin. The radio chatter filled Becca's helmet as Thompson's flight engaged the incoming Rafales. "Blue 2, I've got tone. Fox 3. Martinez's voice cracked with excitement as he simulated a missile launch. "Negative kill," came the emotionless voice of the range controller. "Blue 2, you're eliminated. RTB immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Martinez shot down within the first 2 minutes of engagement, limped home with his tail between his legs. The Rafale pilots weren't playing games. "Blue lead, where's your backup?" The French accent was thick but unmistakable. "We expected 4 aircraft." Thompson's voice tightened. "She's around here somewhere. Haze, sound off." Becca keyed her mic once, a brief squelch that confirmed her presence without revealing her position. She was currently running the second leg of her triangle, using a thermal layer at 8,000 feet to mask her heat signature. Her passive sensors painted a crystal-clear picture of the battle developing 30 miles to her north. "Helpful as always," Thompson muttered, not realizing his transmission was being broadcast to the entire exercise. "Blue 3, stay tight on me. We've got this." What Thompson didn't have was situational awareness. The lead Rafale had split from his wingmen and was currently using the same ridgeline Becca had mapped weeks ago, approaching from an angle that would put him directly in Thompson's blind spot. She watched the geometry develop on her display with grim fascination. "Blue lead, bandit low, you're 6 o'clock, Jackson called out, but too late. "Blue lead eliminated," the range controller announced. "Blue 3, you are alone." In the space of 4 minutes, Thompson's formation had been cut in half. Jackson's panicked breathing filled the radio as he found himself outnumbered 3-1 against some of the most skilled pilots in NATO. Back at Nellis Air Force Base, Major Davidson stood in the command center watching the tactical display. With growing frustration, the exercise was supposed to demonstrate American air superiority to their international guests. Instead, it was turning into an embarrassment. "Where the hell is Haze?" he barked at the radar operator. "Sir, she's maintaining her assigned patrol pattern. Last known position was Grid Square Echo 7, but we've had intermittent contact. Intermittent contact? She's flying a $40 million aircraft, not a crop duster. What Davidson didn't understand was that Becca's intermittent contact was entirely intentional. She'd programmed her transponder to pulse only when regulations required it, keeping her presence known to friendly controllers while remaining invisible to enemy sensors. It was a technique she'd developed during countless hours of after-duty research studying classified stealth protocols that most pilots never bothered to read. The Rafael leader's voice came through the international frequency, professional but tinged with amusement. American Control, are you sure you have 4 aircraft? We count only 3. Davidson's jaw tightened. The French pilot was essentially asking if the Americans had lost track of their own aircraft. It was the kind of question that would generate uncomfortable reports and difficult phone calls to Washington. All American aircraft are accounted for, he replied stiffly. Meanwhile, Jackson was running for his life. The 3 Rafaels had him boxed in, using a classic pincer movement that forced him into increasingly desperate maneuvers. His fuel was burning fast, his options were disappearing, and his confidence had evaporated entirely. Blue 320. Station, I need help! His voice cracked with stress. Where is everyone? Buck up, Jackson, came Thompson's voice from the ground. You've got this. Easy words from someone already shot down. Becca listened to Jackson's situation deteriorate and made a decision. She wasn't supposed to deviate from her patrol pattern, but she also wasn't supposed to let her teammates get slaughtered for the sake of following orders that made no tactical sense. She banked her F-35 toward the northwest, still maintaining a mission silence. Her passive sensors tracked the developing furball with precision. Jackson was running east, bleeding altitude and speed. The 3 Rafaels were closing in perfect formation, their radar signatures blazing across her display like searchlights in the dark. Blue 3, break left, she transmitted suddenly. Haze, where are you? Jackson's relief was palpable. Just fly, Jackson. Trust me. What happened next would be discussed in briefing rooms for months afterward. As Jackson broke left, according to Becca's instruction, he unknowingly passed through the exact center of her carefully constructed triangle. The lead Rafale, eager to finish the kill, followed him directly into the radar shadow Becca had been using as cover. For exactly 12 seconds, the French pilot flew blind. Becca's F-35 slid out of the shadow like a shark from deep water. Her passive lock-on tone was so quiet it barely registered in her helmet, but the range computers logged it instantly. Simulated kill on Rafael 1. What the hell? The French pilot's professional composure cracked for the first time. Where? Did that come from? Rafael lead eliminated, the range controller announced with barely concealed satisfaction. Remaining red aircraft reform and continue exercise. The radio exploded with chatter. Jackson whooped with relief. Thompson's voice carried from the ground demanding to know what had happened, and the surviving Rafael pilots conferred rapidly in French, trying to understand how they'd lost their leader to an aircraft they'd never seen coming. Becca said nothing. She simply melted back into her patrol pattern, returning to the electronic shadows as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The triangle wasn't just a patrol route anymore. It was a killing field, and she was its master. In the command center, Davidson stared at the tactical display in confusion. How did Haze get a kill? She's been running that same boring pattern for 20 minutes. The radar operator, a tech sergeant with 15 years of experience, looked up from his scope with newfound respect in his eyes. Sir, I think that boring pattern might not be so boring after all. For the first time since the exercise began, Davidson wondered if he'd underestimated his backup pilot. The thought made him distinctly uncomfortable. The remaining Rafaels, now wary and confused, began flying more cautiously. They'd lost their leader to an opponent they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't predict. The psychological warfare had begun, and Becca hadn't fired a shot or spoken a word beyond that single life-saving instruction to Jackson. As she settled back into the rhythm of her triangle, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The mockery from this morning felt like a lifetime ago. The real question now was whether her teammates would learn to respect quiet competence, or if they'd find new ways to dismiss what they couldn't understand. The exercise was far from over, and the best was yet to come. The second wave of Rafales arrived like a thunderstorm, 6 aircraft instead of 3, their formation tight and professional. Major Davidson's voice cut through the radio chatter, with barely controlled frustration. "Blue Flight, we've got reinforcements inbound." "This is now a 2 versus 6 scenario," Jackson's voice crackled through the comm. 2 versus 6? Sir, what about Haze?" A pause, then Davidson's dismissive tone. "Haze is running perimeter security. This is a real pilot's fight now, Jackson. Don't embarrass us again." The words hit Becca like a physical blow. After saving Jackson's life and downing the enemy flight leader, she was still being treated like excess baggage. She watched her radar display as the 6 Rafales split into 3 pairs, executing a textbook multi-axis attack that would overwhelm any conventional defense. Jackson and his replacement wingman, Captain Dave Wilson, who'd launched as a backup, were about to face impossible odds. The French pilots had clearly studied the previous engagement and adjusted their tactics accordingly. "Blue 3 and 4 maintain defensive posture," Davidson commanded from the ground. "Haze, continue your patrol. Stay out of the way." "Stay out of the way." The phrase burned in Becca's mind as she watched the tactical situation develop. The Rafales were using a complex weaving pattern, making it impossible for Jackson and Wilson to lock onto any single target while gradually tightening the noose. It was brilliant flying, and it was about to result in a complete American defeat. Through her passive sensors, she could see what the ground controllers couldn't. The Rafales weren't just attacking randomly, they were herding Jackson and Wilson into a specific area of airspace, a kill box where all 6 enemy aircraft could engage simultaneously while minimizing the risk of friendly fire. "Blue 3, I'm spiked!" Wilson's voice carried pure panic. "Multiple missiles inbound!" "Blue 4 eliminated," the range controller announced 30 seconds later. Now it was Jackson alone against 6 of Europe's finest pilots. The outcome was inevitable, but Davidson seemed determined to let it play out rather than admit his tactics were flawed. "Blue 3, evade and maintain," Davidson ordered. "Use your training." Jackson's training was excellent, but no amount of individual skill could overcome such overwhelming odds. Becca watched as the Rafales began their final approach, converging on Jackson's position like wolves surrounding wounded prey. In 60 seconds, maybe less, the exercise would be over, and the Americans would face the humiliation of total defeat. "Blue 3 to control," Jackson transmitted, his voice steady despite the impossible situation. "Request permission to deviate from flight plan and link up with Blue 1. "Negative, Blue 3. Maintain current heading. Haze, do not, I repeat, do not interfere with this engagement." The direct order was unmistakable. Becca was being explicitly commanded to watch her teammate die rather than use her position and capabilities to even the odds. It was the moment she realized that some people would rather lose with their prejudices intact than win by acknowledging talent they'd chosen to overlook. She made her decision. "Blue 1, moving to assist," she transmitted calmly. "Haze, belay." "That order!" Davidson's voice rose to a shout. "Return to patrol immediately!" Becca switched off her radio. What happened next would be analyzed and reanalyzed by tactical experts for years. As the 6 Rafales closed on Jackson's position, they passed directly through the center of Becca's triangle. Not the patrol route they'd dismissed as busy work, but the 3-dimensional kill zone she'd spent months perfecting. Her F-35 emerged from electronic silence like a predator from tall grass. In the span of 90 seconds, she achieved what military historians would later call the Triangle Massacre, using a combination of perfectly timed intercepts, radar shadows, and thermal. Masking, she eliminated 4 of the 6 remaining Rafales before they even knew she was there. The first kill came as the lead pair passed through her northern approach vector. Becca had positioned herself in the radar shadow of a mountain peak, using the terrain to mask her signature until she was close enough for a heat-seeking lock. The Rafale pilot never saw her coming. The second and third kills happened almost simultaneously. As the remaining aircraft maneuvered to avoid Jackson's defensive fire, they separated just enough for Becca to thread between them. Her F-35's Stealth capabilities allowed her to approach from an angle that put both enemy aircraft in her firing solution at once. 2 simulated Sidewinder missiles, 2 confirmed kills. The 4th kill was pure artistry. The surviving Rafale pilot, realizing he was facing an invisible opponent, began flying erratically, hoping to break whatever lock Becca might have on him. Instead of chasing him directly, she predicted his flight path based on fuel consumption and tactical doctrine. When he turned toward what he thought was safety, she was already there, waiting. Rafale 6 eliminated, the range controller announced, his voice filled with disbelief. All red aircraft eliminated. Exercise terminated. The radio silence that followed was deafening. In the space of 2 engagements, Becca had single-handedly turned a humiliating American defeat into a stunning victory, downing 5 of 9 enemy aircraft without taking a single hit in return. Jackson's voice finally broke the silence. "Haze, how the hell did you do that?" Before she could answer, Davidson's furious transmission cut through the channel. "Blue 1, you are ordered to return to base immediately for disciplinary action. You deliberately disobeyed direct orders." "Copy that, Control," Becca replied, her voice steady as granite. Blue 1 returning to base. As she banked toward Nellis, she caught a glimpse of the other aircraft in the exercise area. Jackson and the surviving pilots were forming up in what looked suspiciously like an honor escort. Even some of the eliminated Rafale pilots had rejoined the formation, drawn by professional respect for what they'd just witnessed. But Becca's mind wasn't on the escort or the victory. She was thinking about Major Davidson's voice, about the direct order to stay out of the way while her teammates faced impossible odds. She was thinking about months of dismissive comments, upside-down nameplates, and assignments designed to keep her invisible rather than utilize her skills. Most of all, she was thinking about the conversation she was about to have with Davidson and his superiors. Because what had just happened in the Nevada sky wasn't just a tactical victory, it was proof that the Air Force's most overlooked pilot might also be its most dangerous. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. The debriefing room felt like a tribunal. Major Davidson sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with barely controlled anger, while Colonel Rebecca Turner, the base commander, occupied the seat of judgment at his right. Becca sat alone on the opposite side, still in her flight suit, her helmet resting on the table between them like evidence in a court case. "Captain Haze," Colonel Turner began, her voice carefully neutral, "you directly disobeyed a clear order during a live exercise. That's insubordination, and it carries serious consequences." Davidson leaned forward, his voice tight with vindication. "She compromised the entire training scenario. We were demonstrating defensive tactics to our NATO allies, and she turned it into some kind of personal showcase." Becca remained silent, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She'd learned long ago that the first person to lose their composure usually lost the argument entirely. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Captain?" Turner asked. "Yes, ma'am." Becca's voice was steady, professional. "I prevented the complete annihilation of American forces during an international training exercise. The tactical situation had deteriorated to the point where Captain Jackson was facing 6-to-1 odds with no support. You had explicit orders to maintain patrol," Davidson snapped. "Your job was perimeter security, not heroics." "My job, sir, is to complete the mission and bring my teammates home alive." Becca met his glare without flinching. "The mission parameters didn't include allowing our pilots to be used as target practice." Colonel Turner studied the tactical printouts spread across the table. The numbers were undeniable: 5 enemy kills, 0 friendly losses after Becca's intervention, and a complete reversal of what had been shaping up as a humiliating defeat. "The French pilots are calling it the most impressive display of stealth tactics they've ever seen," Turner said quietly. "Their commander wants to know if we'd be willing to share training protocols." Davidson's face darkened. "Colonel, we can't let one lucky engagement overshadow the breakdown in discipline." "Lucky?" The voice came from the doorway. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez stepped into the room, a thick folder under her arm. "Colonel Turner, permission to speak?" Turner nodded, curious about the interruption. Maria placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing months of maintenance logs, simulator records, and training documentation. Ma'am, Captain Haze has been running unauthorized training scenarios for the past 8 months, after-hours simulator time, tactical analysis of range topography, stealth protocol optimization, all on her own initiative. She pulled out a hand-drawn map covered in precise notations and calculations. This is her personal tactical analysis of the Nevada range. Every radar shadow, every thermal layer, every blind spot. She's been preparing for exactly what happened today. Davidson grabbed the map, studying it with growing disbelief. The level of detail was extraordinary. Elevation markers, wind patterns, electromagnetic interference zones, all cross-referenced with enemy approach vectors and friendly patrol routes. "Where did she get this data?" he demanded. "Publicly available. Topographic surveys, declassified radar studies, and her own observations during training flights," Maria replied. "Everything completely legal and within regulations. She just put in the work that nobody else was willing to do." Colonel Turner examined the documentation with growing interest. The simulator logs showed Becca had logged more stealth training hours than the rest of her squadron combined. Her tactical studies covered scenarios that weren't even part of the official curriculum. "Captain Haze," Turner said slowly, "how long have you been developing these techniques?" "Since flight school, ma'am. I realized early on that my flying style wasn't appreciated by most instructors. So I focused on areas where I could make a unique contribution." "You mean you focused on being invisible because nobody wanted to see you anyway?" Maria said bluntly, earning a sharp look from Davidson. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room knew about the pattern, the dismissive comments, the backup assignments, the casual mockery that had become routine whenever Becca's name came up. What they hadn't realized was that she'd been using that dismissal as camouflage, developing capabilities that made her uniquely valuable. Turner stood up and walked to the window overlooking the flight line. "Major Davidson, what was your assessment of Captain Haze prior to today's exercise?" Davidson shifted uncomfortably. "Technically competent but lacking in aggressive instincts. Not suitable for frontline combat roles." "And now?" A long pause. The results speak for themselves, ma'am." Turner turned back to face the room. "The results tell me we've been wasting one of our most capable pilots on busy work while she developed world-class stealth tactics on her own time." Her voice carried an edge of steel. "That's not just poor leadership, Major. It's a failure of our entire evaluation system." Becca felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. For the first time in years, someone in authority was acknowledging what she'd always known, that quiet competence could be just as valuable as loud confidence if anyone bothered to notice it. "Captain Haze," Turner continued, "I'm assigning you to develop a comprehensive stealth tactics program for this wing. You'll have access to classified stealth protocols and the authority to requisition whatever resources you need." Davidson's objection was immediate. "Colonel, we can't base an entire program on one successful engagement. We're not basing it on one engagement, Major. We're basing it on months of dedicated preparation that nobody bothered to recognize." Turner's tone left no room for argument. "Captain Haze will also be promoted to the position of Chief Stealth Tactics Instructor, effective immediately." The silence that followed was profound. Becca had gone from backup pilot to department head in the span of a single conversation. But more importantly, she'd gone from being overlooked to being officially recognized for the skills she'd been developing in isolation. "Thank you, ma'am," Becca said quietly. "I won't let you down." "You already haven't," Turner replied. "The question now is whether the rest of us can catch up to where you've already been." As the meeting broke up, Maria approached Becca with a knowing smile. "Told you that boring triangle wasn't so boring after all?" Becca allowed herself a small smile in return. The fight back had begun, and for the first time in her career she wasn't fighting alone, but she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Changing minds would be harder than changing tactics, and not everyone would be happy about her sudden elevation. The victory in the sky had been clean and decisive. The victory on the ground would be messier, more complex, and far more personal. Still, as she walked out of the debriefing room with her new assignment in hand, Becca felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The shadows she'd learned to inhabit so skillfully were finally working in her favor. Word traveled fast in the close-knit world of military aviation. Within 24 hours of the exercise, Becca's tactical triumph had become legend. But not everyone was celebrating. In the officers' club that evening, a small group gathered around Thompson and Davidson, their voices low but their resentment unmistakable. "It's political correctness run amok," Thompson muttered into his beer. "One lucky day and suddenly she's the golden girl. I've been flying combat missions while she was playing hide-and-seek in the desert." Captain Rodriguez nodded emphatically. "This whole stealth instructor thing is just the brass covering their asses. They're afraid of looking bad for not recognizing her genius earlier." He made air quotes around the word genius, his sarcasm thick as motor oil. Major Davidson remained silent, but his clenched jaw spoke volumes. Having one of his unremarkable pilots publicly elevated above him was a professional humiliation he wasn't handling well. What they didn't know was that Staff Sergeant Gonzalez was sitting 2 tables away, well within earshot of their conversation. And Maria had never been one to let injustice slide. The next morning, Becca arrived at her new office to find a stack of transfer requests on her desk. Thompson, Rodriguez, Martinez, and 2 other pilots from the squadron had all requested immediate reassignment to maintain operational continuity in their current roles. The message was clear. They'd rather leave than serve under someone they'd spent months dismissing. Colonel Turner knocked on Becca's open door. "I see you've received the good news," she said dryly, gesturing to the transfer requests. "They have the right to request reassignment, ma'am," Becca replied diplomatically. "They do, but timing is everything in the military, Captain." Turner sat down across from Becca's desk. "Did you know we've received 3 separate requests from Foreign Air Forces for joint training exercises, specifically requesting the pilot who developed the Nevada Triangle tactics?" Becca looked up in surprise. "I wasn't aware, ma'am. The French want to study stealth intercept techniques. The Israelis are interested in asymmetric air defense strategies. The RAF wants to send a delegation to observe our training methods." Turner smiled grimly. "Suddenly, your quiet little triangle has become a very big deal." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same tactics that had been dismissed as playing hide-and-seek were now being hailed as revolutionary by some of the world's most respected air forces. "There's more," Turner continued. "The Pentagon wants a full briefing on your methods. General Patricia Haze, no relation, I assume, specifically requested you for a presentation to the Joint Chiefs." Becca felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. The higher the stakes got, the more opportunities there were for things to go wrong. "Ma'am, I should mention that several pilots in my former unit have expressed concerns about my promotion." Turner's expression hardened. "What kind of concerns?" Before Becca could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria. "Check the squadron message board, now." Turner noticed Becca's change in expression. "What is it?" "I think I need to show you something, ma'am." They walked together to the squadron ready room where a small crowd had gathered around the bulletin board. Someone had posted a printout of an anonymous email that had been circulating among the pilots. "Attention all personnel. The recent promotion of certain individuals based on single incidents rather than consistent performance sets a dangerous precedent. Real combat effectiveness comes from proven leadership and aggressive tactics, not from hiding in corners and claiming credit for lucky shots. True pilots lead from the front, not from the shadows." The email wasn't signed, but the language and tone were unmistakably Thompson's. Several pilots were reading it with obvious agreement, while others looked uncomfortable with the public nature of the complaint. Turner's face went through several shades of red as she read. "Who posted this?" "No one knows, ma'am," said Captain Lisa Park, one of the newer pilots. "It was here when we arrived this morning." "Well, it won't be here much longer." Turner tore the printout down with perhaps more force than necessary. "And I want to see Lieutenant Thompson in my office immediately." As word spread about the colonel's demand, the crowd dispersed quickly. Becca found herself standing alone with Captain Park, who had remained behind. "Captain Haze," Park said quietly, "I wanted you to know that not everyone feels that way. what you did out there. It was incredible. I've been studying your tactical analysis, and I'd like to request assignment to your stealth program." It was the first unconditional support Becca had received from a fellow pilot, and it meant more than she could express. "Thank you, Lisa. I'd be honored to have you on the team." There are others, too. Quiet professionals who've been overlooked. Because they don't fit the traditional fighter pilot mold. We've been watching what you've accomplished, and we want to learn. As Park walked away, Becca realized that the controversy surrounding her promotion was serving an unexpected purpose. It was forcing people to choose sides. The pilots who valued substance over swagger were stepping forward, while those committed to the old ways were making their opposition increasingly public. That afternoon, Thompson was escorted from the base by security after his meeting with Colonel Turner. His transfer request had been accelerated to immediate reassignment, but not to the prestigious posting he'd expected. Instead, he was being sent to a training command position reviewing flight safety protocols, important work, but hardly the combat role he'd been seeking. Rodriguez and Martinez received formal reprimands for conduct unbecoming, and their transfer requests were denied pending completion of attitude adjustment counseling. The message was clear: the Air Force was taking Becca's program seriously, and open insubordination wouldn't be tolerated. But the real victory came that evening when Becca returned to her office to find a new stack of papers on her desk. Not transfer requests this time, but applications. 7 pilots from across the base had formally requested assignment to the stealth tactics program, including 2 decorated combat veterans who had been overlooked for promotion themselves. Maria knocked on the doorframe, grinning broadly. "Looks like word is getting out that there's a new way to fly around here." "It's not new," Becca corrected. "It's just finally being recognized." Same difference. The old boys club is scrambling to figure out how they missed this, and the smart pilots are lining up to learn from you. Maria's expression grew more serious. "But you know this isn't over, right? People like Thompson don't just disappear. They regroup and come back harder." Becca nodded. She'd known from the beginning that proving herself once wouldn't be enough. There would be more tests, more challenges, more people determined to prove that her success was somehow illegitimate. But as she looked at the applications spread across her desk, pilots eager to learn the art of invisible warfare, she felt a quiet confidence settle in her chest. She'd built her reputation one careful flight at a time, one precisely calculated maneuver after another. Now she had the chance to build something bigger, a new generation of pilots who understood that the deadliest warriors weren't always the loudest ones. The downfall of the old guard had begun, and it was happening exactly the way Becca did everything else: quietly, methodically, and with devastating effectiveness. 3 weeks later, the Pentagon briefing room hummed with nervous energy. Becca stood at the front of the room, her presentation materials arranged with military precision, facing an audience that included 2 4-star generals, the Secretary of the Air Force, and several international observers. Among them sat General Patricia Haze, no relation but sharing the same unflinching stare that had made her a legend in military aviation. The room fell silent as Becca began her presentation. "Gentlemen, ma'am, what you're about to see represents a fundamental shift in air combat tactics, not through new technology, but through the strategic application of existing stealth capabilities." The first slide showed the Nevada exercise from 3 weeks prior, a tactical display that had become famous throughout NATO air forces. Becca's measured voice filled the room as she walked through each phase of the engagement, explaining how traditional aggressive tactics had been neutralized by a patient, invisible approach. The enemy expected American pilots to fly loud, fast, and directly toward engagement. Instead, we gave them shadows and silence. General Patricia Haze leaned forward. "Captain, your methods are impressive, but how do we know this wasn't simply a case of unprepared opponents? Combat is rarely as clean as training exercises." Before Becca could respond, the briefing room door opened. Major Davidson entered, flanked by 2 officers Becca didn't recognize. Her former commander's presence sent a ripple of tension through the room. "I apologize for the interruption," Davidson announced, his voice carrying the weight of official business, "but I believe this briefing is based on incomplete information." Colonel Turner, who had accompanied Becca to Washington, stood up sharply. Major Davidson, this is highly irregular. Colonel Turner, with respect, I've been conducting a formal investigation into the claims surrounding Captain Haze's tactics. Davidson moved to the front of the room, placing a thick folder on the presentation table. The results raise serious questions about the validity of her methods. General Haze's expression darkened. Explain yourself, Major. Davidson opened the folder with theatrical precision. After reviewing telemetry data from the Nevada exercise, we've discovered several anomalies. Captain Haze's aircraft showed impossible performance characteristics, radar signatures that appeared and disappeared without explanation, heat blooms that didn't match her recorded flight path. Becca felt the room's energy shift against her. The implication was clear. Davidson was suggesting her results had been artificially enhanced, possibly through unauthorized modifications or even falsified data. Furthermore, Davidson continued, his confidence growing, we found evidence that Captain Haze had advanced knowledge of the enemy flight plans. Her positioning was too perfect, too precisely timed to be the result of skill alone. The accusation hung in the air like a live grenade. Several officers exchanged glances, their faith in Becca's presentation visibly shaking. If Davidson was right, everything they'd just witnessed was built on deception. General Haze's voice cut through the tension like a blade. These are serious allegations, Major. Do you have proof of misconduct? I have enough evidence to recommend a full investigation, Davidson replied. The Air Force cannot base its tactical doctrine on potentially fraudulent demonstrations. Becca stood perfectly still, her mind racing through the implications. Davidson had waited until she was at her most visible, most vulnerable moment to strike. It was a calculated ambush designed to destroy not just her credibility, but the entire stealth program she'd been building. Captain Haze, General Haze said slowly, how do you respond to these accusations? For a moment, Becca felt the familiar weight of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. The old instinct to stay quiet, to let others define her worth, rose in her chest like a familiar ache. Then she remembered the applications on her desk, the pilots eager to learn a new way of flying. She thought about Maria Gonzalez, Captain Park, and all the others who had believed in her when belief was scarce. Most of all, she remembered the satisfaction of proving that quiet competence could be more powerful than loud arrogance. General, she said, her voice steady as steel, I'd like to propose a demonstration. Davidson's confident smile faltered slightly. A demonstration? Real-time live aircraft with full oversight from Pentagon observers. Becca turned to address the entire room. Major Davidson has suggested my methods only work under controlled conditions with advanced knowledge. I'm willing to prove otherwise. What exactly are you proposing? General Haze asked. Give me any aircraft, any airspace, any opponent you choose. No advanced briefings, no preparation time, no support beyond what's standard for a single pilot. If I can replicate my Nevada performance under those conditions, it proves my methods are legitimate. If I can't, she met Davidson's eyes directly. Then Major Davidson's investigation will have merit. The room erupted in murmured conversations. The proposal was audacious, essentially challenging the Pentagon to test her skills in front of the highest levels of military leadership. It was either supreme confidence or career suicide. General Haze stood up, her presence commanding immediate silence. Major Davidson, you've made serious accusations that require serious proof. Captain Haze has offered to provide that proof, under conditions that would eliminate any possibility of deception. She paused, studying both officers carefully. I'm inclined to accept her proposal. Davidson's face went pale. He'd expected Becca to crumble under pressure, not double down with an even bolder challenge. General, that wasn't the intent of my investigation. Wasn't it? General Haze's tone carried the edge of someone who'd seen too many careers, destroyed by petty jealousy. Because from where I sit, it looks like you've just accused one of our pilots of fraud in front of international observers. That kind of accusation demands resolution. She turned to Becca. Captain Haze, you have 48 hours to demonstrate your tactics against an opponent of our choosing. The engagement will be monitored by international observers and recorded for Analysis. The results will determine not only the validity of your methods, but the future of stealth tactics in American air doctrine. As the room began to clear, Davidson approached Becca with desperation creeping into his voice. Haze, you don't understand what you've just done. The Pentagon doesn't issue challenges lightly. If you fail— I won't fail, Becca interrupted, quietly. But Major, you might want to consider what happens if I succeed. For the first time since entering the briefing room, Davidson looked genuinely frightened. He'd gambled everything on destroying Becca's credibility, but instead had created the conditions for her ultimate vindication. As Becca packed up her presentation materials, she felt the familiar calm that preceded her best flying. The stakes had never been higher, but the principles remained the same: patience, precision, and the quiet confidence that came from years of preparation. In 48 hours, she would either prove that invisible warfare was the future of air combat or watch her career disappear as completely as she'd learned to vanish in the sky. The confrontation was set, and there would be no hiding from the results. The Nevada desert had never hosted a more important air combat demonstration. 2 days after the Pentagon confrontation, the restricted airspace buzzed with more electronic surveillance equipment than most actual combat zones. International observers occupied a specially constructed viewing platform, while multiple radar installations tracked every movement with unprecedented precision. Becca stood beside her F-35, running through her pre-flight checklist with the same methodical calm that had defined her entire career. But today was different. Today, the entire future of American air combat doctrine hung in the balance. Nervous? Colonel Turner asked, approaching with Becca's final briefing packet. No, ma'am. Ready. Becca's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The terms of the demonstration had been designed to eliminate any possibility of deception. Becca would face an unknown opponent in an aircraft of the Pentagon's choosing, flying a mission profile she wouldn't see until 30 minutes before takeoff. No advanced scouting, no prepared tactics, no support beyond what any pilot could expect in actual combat. Her opponent was Colonel James Razor Murphy, a Top Gun instructor with over 200 combat missions and a reputation for never losing an engagement. Murphy would fly the latest F-22 Raptor, giving him every possible advantage in speed, maneuverability, and weapon systems. In the viewing area, Major Davidson sat with rigid posture, his career balanced on the knife's edge of the next hour's events. If Becca failed, his investigation would be vindicated and his own reputation restored. If she succeeded, he would be finished. Ladies and gentlemen, General Haze announced to the assembled observers, what you're about to witness is a test of tactical innovation versus traditional air superiority doctrine. Both pilots are among our finest, flying our most advanced aircraft. She paused, looking directly at the international delegation. The results will influence how NATO air forces approach air combat for the next generation. In the cockpit of his F-22, Colonel Murphy couldn't help but smile. He'd studied Becca's Nevada engagement, analyzed her tactics, and developed specific countermeasures. More importantly, he was flying the most advanced air superiority fighter ever built against an aircraft designed for ground attack missions that happened to have stealth capabilities. This should be interesting, he murmured to himself as his engines spooled up. Becca's pre-flight was complete. She climbed into her F-35 and sealed the canopy, shutting out the desert heat and the weight of expectations. Inside the cockpit, surrounded by familiar displays and controls, she felt the transformation that had defined her career, from overlooked pilot to invisible predator. Her mission briefing had been devastatingly simple. Locate and engage a single enemy aircraft in 500 square miles of airspace. No additional intelligence, no support, no backup. Find him before he finds you or lose everything. Blue 1, you are cleared for takeoff, came the controller's voice. Red 1, cleared for takeoff, Murphy's confident voice followed. Both aircraft lifted off simultaneously from opposite ends of the range, climbing into the crystal-clear Nevada sky. The electronic warfare had begun before either pilot could see the other. Murphy immediately began an aggressive search pattern, his F-22's powerful radar sweeping the airspace in wide arcs. His strategy was textbook air superiority. use superior sensors and speed to locate the enemy, then engage with overwhelming firepower before they could respond. Becca did exactly what she'd been doing for years. She disappeared. Her F-35 slipped into full stealth mode, radar cross-section reduced to virtually nothing, heat signature masked by careful throttle control and terrain positioning. But this time she wasn't just hiding. She was hunting. "Red One has contact," Murphy announced confidently after 10 minutes of searching. "Bearing 270, low altitude, heading northeast." In the command center, Davidson leaned forward eagerly. Murphy was tracking something, which meant Becca's stealth had failed, but Colonel Turner was studying the raw radar data, and her expression was troubled. "That's not Blue One," she said quietly to the technician beside her. "Check the electronic signature." Murphy's contact was actually a radar reflection from a commercial airliner passing through controlled airspace 100 miles away. A ghost. Echo that Becca had learned to recognize and use as camouflage during her months of study. While Murphy chased phantoms, Becca used her passive sensors to build a complete picture of his search pattern. The F-22 was fast and powerful, but it was also loud and predictable. Murphy was flying exactly the way his training had taught him. Aggressively, confidently, and visibly. 20 minutes into the engagement, Murphy began to show signs of frustration. "Red One, I'm not finding anything out here. Are we sure Blue One actually launched?" In the viewing area, several observers exchanged glances. The most advanced air superiority fighter in the world couldn't locate an aircraft that had taken off from the same base minutes earlier. Becca had been shadowing Murphy for 15 minutes, staying just outside his sensor range while learning his patterns. The F-22 was magnificent, but its pilot was becoming predictable. Murphy favored high-speed turns to the right. He climbed. When uncertain, and he always returned to the same quadrant when resetting his search pattern. More importantly, his fuel was burning faster than hers. The F-22's powerful engines came with a price, shorter endurance than her more efficient F-35. "Red One, extending search to northern quadrant," Murphy transmitted, frustration creeping into his voice. It was the opening Becca had been waiting for. As Murphy banked north, climbing for better radar coverage, he passed directly through the corner of her three-dimensional hunting ground, the invisible geometry she'd learned to create wherever she flew. The passive lock tone in her helmet was so soft it was barely audible, but the computer logged it with digital certainty. Simulated missile lock on Red One. "Blue One, Fox 3, Becca transmitted calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Murphy's F-22 had been shot down by an opponent he'd never seen, never tracked, and never engaged. According to the electronic warfare computers, Becca's simulated missile would have struck his aircraft before his radar warning system even activated. "Red One." Murphy's voice carried the stunned disbelief of a pilot realizing he'd been comprehensively outflown. "Where the hell did that come from?" "Game over," the range controller announced. "Blue One wins by missile engagement. Both aircraft. Return to base." In the viewing area, the international observers erupted in animated discussion. The demonstration had exceeded every expectation, proving that stealth tactics could neutralize even the most advanced conventional air superiority systems. Major Davidson sat in stunned silence, watching his career evaporate as completely as Becca had vanished from Murphy's radar. His investigation, his accusations, his attempt to destroy her credibility, all of it had just backfired spectacularly in front of the highest levels of military leadership. General Haze stood up, her voice carrying the authority of someone making history. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've just witnessed represents the future of air combat. Captain Haze has demonstrated that tactical innovation and individual skill can overcome technological advantages." She turned to address the room directly. "Effective immediately, the stealth tactics program will be expanded to all NATO air forces. Captain Haze will lead the development of this new doctrine with full Pentagon support." As Becca's F-35 touched down on the Nevada runway, she felt a satisfaction deeper than any she'd ever experienced. Not because she'd won, but because she'd proven that quiet competence could triumph over loud arrogance, that patient preparation could defeat rushed aggression, and that being overlooked could become the greatest tactical advantage of all. The ultimate victory belonged not just to her, but to every pilot who'd ever been dismissed for not fitting the traditional mold, every service member who'd been underestimated for preferring substance over swagger. In the sky above Nevada, the future of air combat had been written by someone the old guard had never seen coming. And they never would, until it was too late. 6 months later, Becca stood in the same briefing room where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The walls were covered with tactical displays showing stealth intercept patterns, electromagnetic warfare protocols, and joint training exercises with 12 different NATO air forces. The placard by the door read, Colonel Rebecca Haze, Director of Advanced Stealth Tactics. The promotion had come through 3 weeks after the Pentagon demonstration, along with a congressional commendation and invitations to speak at AIR. War colleges around the world, but the real satisfaction came from watching her former tormentors adjust to a new reality. Major Davidson had been reassigned to a desk job at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he spent his days reviewing technical manuals for aircraft he would never fly again. His investigation had been quietly buried, and his name had become synonymous with the kind of small-minded thinking the Air Force was trying to leave behind. Thompson had washed out of his training command position and left the military entirely. His social media feeds full of bitter complaints about political correctness and diversity hires. Rodriguez and Martinez had grudgingly completed their attitude adjustment counseling and requested transfer to Becca's program, a request she had graciously denied. The pilots who had embraced the new tactics were thriving. Captain Lisa Park had become Becca's deputy director, leading training programs that were revolutionizing how NATO forces approached air combat. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had been promoted to technical sergeant and put in charge of the stealth tactics maintenance protocols that kept the invisible warriors truly invisible. Colonel Haze, a young lieutenant, appeared in the doorway. The French delegation has arrived for their advanced certification training. Becca nodded, straightening her uniform. The French pilots, who had been humiliated in that first Nevada exercise, had returned as eager students, determined to master the tactics that had defeated them so completely. It was a transformation that spoke to the professional respect that transcended national boundaries. As she walked toward the flight line, Becca passed a group of new pilots studying tactical manuals in the break area. Their conversation stopped, her in her tracks. "I heard Colonel Haze never even talked back to the guys who made fun of her," one young pilot was saying. "She just kept working, kept getting better, until she was so good they couldn't ignore her anymore." "My instructor says that's the real lesson," another pilot replied. "Not the stealth tactics, but the patience. Building something so solid that, when you finally show it, nobody can tear it down." A third pilot, a young woman with captain's bars, looked up from her manual. "I heard she still flies the same way, quiet, precise, invisible until the moment she strikes. They call it the Haze method now." Becca smiled and continued walking, leaving the young pilots to their studies. The Haze method. It had a nice ring to it, though she preferred to think of it as simply doing the job right, regardless of who was or wasn't watching. On the flight line, her F-35 sat in its usual spot, still matte gray, still unmarked, still looking like exactly what it was, a weapon designed for invisible warfare. The difference was that now everyone understood what they were looking at. Colonel Turner approached from the operations building, a familiar smile on her face. "The Pentagon called this morning," she said. "They want to know if you're interested in a new assignment." Becca raised an eyebrow. "What kind of assignment?" "Teaching stealth tactics to CIA pilots. Black operations, completely classified. The kind of flying where being invisible isn't just an advantage, it's the difference between life and death." The offer was tempting, but Becca had learned to be wary of sudden opportunities. "What's the catch?" Turner's smile widened. "No catch. They specifically requested you because they need someone who can operate completely independently, without backup or support. Someone who's used to being overlooked and underestimated." It was perfect. Another chance to turn the very traits that had held her back into the qualities that made her invaluable. Becca had spent years learning to thrive in the shadows. Now, She could teach others to do the same. When do they need an answer? They don't. They said to take as long as you need because they want the person who builds things right the first time, not the person who makes quick decisions. That evening, Becca sat in her office reviewing applications from the latest group of pilots requesting stealth tactics training. The requests came from every branch of service now, from countries around the world, from pilots who had finally realized that the future of air combat belonged to those who could fight without being seen. Her personal phone buzzed with a text message from Maria. Saw the news about the CIA offer. Whatever you decide, just remember, you changed everything here. That matters. It did matter. Looking back at her career, Becca could see the progression clearly. From overlooked backup pilot to revolutionary tactician to leader of a new generation of invisible warriors. Each stage had built on the quiet competence and patient preparation that had always defined her approach. The real victory wasn't the Pentagon demonstration or the promotions or the international recognition. The real victory was proving that there was more than one way to be excellent, more than one definition of leadership, and more than one path to making a difference. She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing her acceptance letter for the CIA position. As she wrote, she thought about all the pilots who would come after her, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who preferred precision to flash and substance to swagger. They would have a place now, a path forward that honored their strengths instead of demanding they change to fit someone else's idea of what a warrior should look like. Outside her window, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. Somewhere out there, invisible in the darkness, the next generation of stealth pilots was learning to vanish into the sky, to strike without warning, to win without being seen. Becca Haze had taught them that silence was not weakness, it was power. And in the unforgiving world of modern air combat, the quiet warriors would inherit the sky. The backup pilot had become the future, and the future belonged to those who understood that the deadliest enemies were the ones you never saw coming. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not with noise and fire, but with patience, precision, and the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your worth, even when nobody else does. In the end, that was the real lesson of the Haze method. Excellence doesn't need an audience, it just needs opportunity, and when that opportunity comes, you'd better be ready to disappear. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.